Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is concede. Let's take a moment to look at some of the definitions or the ways that we use this verb. The first way you might hear concede used is to mean to admit that something is true or that something is valid after you first denied it. And I'll add to this definition, you may have continued to deny it for a while, but eventually, after some time or maybe some event, you finally go, okay, yep, this thing is true or this is correct. This is something that I know has happened at many places where I have worked in the past, where someone really strongly believes one thing, doesn't want to change their mind, but eventually they might be able to admit or say, you know what, that other thing was correct. A second way, and a way, goodness, if you're living in the United States right now, you're going to hear this verb a lot with the second definition, is to admit defeat in some type of contest or competition. So the way you might be hearing it, again, if you follow US media or you're living in the United States and just happen to be listening to the radio, watching television, listening to podcasts, is in connection to elections. And there are certain candidates who have lost in elections, but they do not admit that they have been defeated. So they are refusing to concede, to admit defeat. A third way you're going to hear concede used is to mean to surrender or yield something that one possesses. Sometimes with this third definition, you hear this in context with war or with battles, and maybe one side conceding an area or a territory. So they're yielding that particular thing as part of the process of fighting. A fourth way you hear concede used is in connection to sports. So people will use it to describe one athlete or one team who fails to prevent the scoring of a goal or scoring of a point due to an opposing player's play, right? So if you're following the World Cup, you might hear this team conceded a goal to this other team. Okay. A fifth way to use the verb concede is to mean to allow a lead or some advantage to slip. So again, you might hear this used in connection to sports and someone scoring, gaining some type of advantage after they had previously been losing. You should know that concede is a regular verb. To make the progressive form of this verb, you need to drop the E and then add ing to form conceding. The past tense and participle forms of this verb can be made by just adding the letter D since this verb already ends in an E. Our base verb, concede, ends in a D sound. So our past tense ending is going to make an id sound, and we're going to add an extra syllable as we say it. It should sound like this: conceded, conceded. Okay? Now, you might be happy to know we have no additional phrasal verbs for us to study, so that's going to allow us to spend some more time talking about how we might use this particular verb in a couple different verb tenses. Today, we're going to practice the past perfect and the present perfect. Let's start with the past perfect. We use this verb tense to note that a particular action was completed before a certain time in the past or before another action. To make the past perfect, my sentence structure is going to be the same no matter what my subject is. So I'm going to have my subject, then I'm going to use the past form of have, which is had, and then I use the participle form of the verb. Here's an example sentence. The candidate had conceded the race before all counties reported their vote totals. So here in this sentence, we have a candidate who, even though all the votes are not in, enough are that this candidate goes, you know what, I know I've lost, right? They're admitting defeat. Now let's look at a negative past perfect sentence. To do this, we have our subject, then we use had not or the contraction hadn't, and then the participle form. Here's an example of this. Before the game with Cameroon, Brazil hadn't conceded a shot on goal in the previous two games. I borrowed this sentence from a news article. Again, I'm trying my best to follow the World Cup, even though I'm struggling to watch a lot of games because I'm teaching. But still, fun to watch highlights and read stories. Here, we're noticing they hadn't even given up a shot. Not that they didn't allow a goal. People couldn't get a shot on goal during those two previous games. So now let's look at a yes or no question. Here, our structure is going to be to start with had, then we'll have our subject, and then the participle form the verb. Here's an example. Had she conceded that she overreacted? So here, this is going to go back to that first definition, right? So we might imagine somebody started yelling or screaming. They got really angry over something very small, right? So we might describe that as overreacting. And maybe at first the person's like, of course I didn't overreact, right? I behaved in the right way, right? But maybe after time passes, they go, you know what? I did overreact, right? So that's what we're asking about in this question. Had she conceded? Did she admit, you know what? I didn't handle that situation well. Now let's move on and talk about the present perfect. We use this verb tense in kind of two different areas. We might use it to talk about a completed action that happened at some unknown point in the past, okay? Or we might use it to describe an action that started in the past and is continuing into the present. In the present perfect, we do need to pay attention to our subjects. If our subjects are I, you, we, or they, I'm going to use have and then the participle. But if my subject is he, she, or it, I'll use has and then my participle. Here's an example sentence. The team has conceded more first half points than any other this season. So we might think of here as sort of like given up or again allowed an opposing team to score points. That's really the connection to the earlier, I think, fourth definition we talked about in this video. I can make a negative present perfect sentence as well. Again, I pay attention to my subject and then I use have or has. That's followed by not and then the participle. You might also hear haven't and then the participle or hasn't and then the participle. Here's an example. Ukraine hasn't conceded territory to Russia. So this would go back to that meaning of surrendering or yielding, saying like, here, you take it, you have it. As part of that ongoing war, Russia has tried to claim certain land or certain territory as their own, but Ukraine has not agreed to that. They have not surrendered. Finally, let's look at a yes or no question. To do this, we start with have or has, then we're going to have our subject, and then the participle form the verb. Here's the last example. Have they conceded their decisions put the company in a bad place? Okay, so again, this is sort of admitting the truth of a matter. So some group of people made some bad decisions. My question is, have they admitted it? Now, let's take a moment to talk about a related word. And that related word is the noun concession. This word can have a number of different meanings. We're going to talk about 4 today. So one way you hear the noun concession used is to refer to something that is granted. And that is particularly after somebody makes a demand, right? They tell you you have to do something, okay? An example of this might be, what concessions did the company make when negotiating with the labor union? So there are always ongoing disputes between companies and labor unions regarding employment contracts, right? So one side in this question. It might be the labor union who said, we want A, B, C, and D, right? And here we're kind of asking, did the company grant one of those things or maybe more than one? Did they say okay to item A? We don't know. A second way to use the noun concession is just to refer to something that has been conceded. So, an example here, will the debt be settled by concession or by special agreement? Okay. So this sentence will also kind of work with our, I think, the third definition here. The action of conceding, granting, or yielding something. All of those things are going to kind of fit together here. So here we have some kind of debt, and we're asking if the debt is going to be settled, right? Going to sort of be canceled by giving up something else or maybe making some type of special agreement. Another way to refer to the noun concession is to refer to the right to use land or property for some purpose. Generally, that right is being given by a government or maybe by a company. An example of this might be, that area is subject to grazing concessions. So maybe we're talking about some large fields, some large territory where a government has said, you know what, it's okay for certain animals to eat the grass, to graze. Okay. The last way you might hear the noun concession used is to refer to the commercial operation of selling food and drink within the premises of a larger place. So for this definition, you might think of stadiums, theaters, other venues like this that sell food and drink for you to be able to enjoy maybe as you're watching a game or as you're watching a movie or something of that nature. So an example of this, maybe you've heard children ask, can we please go to the concession stand, right? So they want a snack, they want some type of treat. Okay. There's one more word we're going to talk about today, and I have a student to thank for this. A student noted to me how the past tense form of our verb conceded, right, sounds like another word, conceited. Okay, small difference there in the pronunciation. So we're getting a did sound on our verb, but you're going to notice a T and then a tid on the adjective. So pay attention to the spelling. You can tell they're very different. You're also going to notice there are very different meanings here. When you hear someone call someone or something else conceited, right? They're describing that person or that thing as being really proud of themselves. Kind of like, I'm so great, okay? Which connects to that last word, vain. Okay. An example of this adjective in a sentence might be, the first time that I talked to him, I thought he was so conceited. Okay. So here we might be describing someone who's bragging a lot. I did this and it was really great. I'm so good at this, right? And it kind of goes on and on. And so that's an adjective that might sound like our past tense verb, but it is not. Very different meanings. And I hope you can see clearly different spellings, and the pronunciation, while close, is just a little bit different. Thanks so much for watching today's video. I hope you have a great day.